Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our LienLaw webinar, Niching into Law, How to Win and Work with Law Firm Clients. I have I have to get my deck to work. For some reason, there it goes. So welcome. I'm gonna kind of introduce what we're doing first, and then I'll introduce my co-presenters. The goals today are, first and foremost, why attorneys and law firms make great clients, why these folks are not only good to work with, but also can be really great partners in developing your practice. Two, we're gonna intro and give you a taste of LienLaw, a little bit of the workflows that are most pertinent to you folks. Three, we're going to talk about the expectations and core needs for law firms, so you not only know why they're good, but like what they expect from you. And then lastly, we'll talk about next steps. So the focus is more about winning and a little bit about how you stage yourself and servicing them. So my co-presenters, Linda and Brandy, why don't you two introduce yourselves to start? Linda, you're on top, so you get to go first.
Hi, I'm Linda Artisani. I'm the owner of Artisani Bookkeeping. I'm from Rhode Island, but I'm actually in Rhode Island at the moment visiting family. My business is actually targeting to attorneys and to real estate and small businesses, really focusing on attorneys. I just started to do the niching towards it recently, so I've been working at it. It's a process, and I really enjoy what I'm doing at my job. And I am also a yoga teacher, and that's my fun job I do to help people.
I didn't know you were a yoga teacher.
I am. I do a couple classes a week. It's
Oh,
fun.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah,
great.
that's so cool.
Yeah, and Brandy, do you teach yoga?
No, I can't even touch my toes. So
Yeah.
I really need to go to yoga.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brandy. You tell us a little bit about you and your practice.
All right, my name is Brandy, and I own Legal Ease Bookkeeping. My practice has been open now for about 2.5 years, and I focus on helping small law firms with their books and understanding their financials and how to grow and areas they can improve on. Let's see, what else? Something interesting about me, I guess, is that I love to travel and visit other countries, and I even lived on a sailboat for a little while.
When was the last? What was the last? What was the last country you went to?
I went to Mexico just a couple of weeks ago. I was in Cabo.
Okay, that's right. I called you, and I literally called her, and she's like, "I'm in Cabo," and I'm like, "Go back to Cabo." Um, So I'm Jonathan Fishman. I'm a founder of LienLaw. I'm kind of a serial startup guy. I've always kind of been in that intersection where tech meets business processes. Here at LienLaw, I'm in charge of the customer. So through the whole life cycle of it, from the time they come into our community through their retention. And one of the current tasks I have is building out our LienLaw Accounting Pro program. So before I jump into LienLaw, a few things to the crowd. We have a question forum here, so you can please ask questions. It'd be great if someone told me that they could hear us, because sometimes we're talking into vapor. So if someone could just post it and saying, "Yep, we can hear you," that would be helpful to me. Please ask any. Thank you all. So we we'll get to any question we possibly can during the course of the meeting. If someone didn't get their question answered or has additional questions, you'll see some follow-up and you can reach out to me directly. LienLaw. So LienLaws came to market in 2016. Our whole goal is to help small law firms with their timekeeping and invoicing workflow. Our unique place in the world is that we see QuickBooks Online as a viable accounting tool for small law firms, but it lacked the core functionality that law firms needed. So using an app in the the QBO marketplace, we extended the functionality of QuickBooks, creating a very robust but efficient timekeeping to invoicing workflow. Two things to note about LienLaw. One is our belief is QuickBooks is the source of truth, and that gives us the best integration in the marketplace because we see QuickBooks as part of the workflow. So when someone onboards into LienLaw, they're onboarding from time tracking in LienLaw to draft invoice creation in LienLaw to invoice distribution from QuickBooks. So QuickBooks is the source of truth, and that workflow is is QuickBooks is has QuickBooks part of it, and some of the nice things that we talked about. So I'm going to start this by talking about the opportunity and challenge, and this is something that we have found in the years of working in LienLaw, is that attorneys find it difficult to find accounting resources that understands how law firms operate. And my first question to you, Brandy, is, knowing this, was this at all a stimulus for you to pick law as your complete focus of your bookkeeping practice? Where did that come from? Where did you see the opportunity from your vantage point?
Well, I do think it was a piece of why I decided to niche in law practices. A lot of bookkeepers don't understand trust accounts, how they work, that the money is not the attorney's and shouldn't be listed on the income statement. And because of that, there's a lot of law practices out there whose books just get really messed up, and they end up paying more taxes than they should at the end of the year, and they don't know where they stand, how their business is actually working and growing. And I think it definitely was a piece of the reason why I chose to niche in attorneys.
Yeah, I want to know where all these really bad bookkeepers are, because I keep seeing with terrible books. We're going to do a quick poll to the group to start things out, and we just want to query. I'm going to launch this very quickly, and you should see a poll asking, do you currently work with law firms? And so we're just going to have this open for a few minutes. Oh, wow. Okay, we're almost there with the voting, over 80%. All right, I'm going to close it. So it's pretty close. Over half of you are working with attorneys, 57%, but 43% aren't. So here's an opportunity and challenge for you. So let's keep moving. And I want to talk just a minute about understanding the law marketplace. So when we talk about law firm sizing, there's actually, this is probably a little dated, there's probably 1.4 million attorneys in the United States alone. 68% of those are in small law firms. Small law firms are deemed typically 20 attorneys or less, and we categorize them into 5 groupings. A solo is a solo. It's an independent independent attorney working by themselves. Solo plus tends to be a solo, but then they have some administrative staff. It might be a paralegal, it could be an office admin, but the idea is it's really their business. They're the primary earner, and they have some support staff. And you can see how when you start to get solo plus, you get payroll and you get some other complexities in the business. Micro is when you get 2 to 4 attorneys or partners. The idea that they're working in a partnership, and then you start getting into some interesting things, not only with staff, but in compensation and how they manage their compensation. Lead principal tends to be a one primary attorney, and then they could have a slew of other attorneys, typically on salary with some type of bonus based on hours billed. The compensation packages are less complex here, but you have more staff. And then you get small law firms, and this is where it gets really complex in terms of, it gets complex in terms of compensation. You have more staff, you just have more moving parts. When we look at the law firm marketplace, there's really, and we're talking about practice management, it's broken up into 2 categories. On your left side, you're seeing conventional practice management. What that means is the attorney or the attorney's firm's looking for a portal, typically online, but older programs are offline on local servers, that help them manage all aspects of a particular matter. So this could be email management, document management, docketing. Docketing is the court rules. So if someone's going to court, it's when certain things need to be filed based on the court. And those are really critical. That's docketing and other aspects of it. And the idea is that we're going to feed all this data into a central place, and all this sort of utopic organization will happen. All of those practice management have an invoicing component in it. On the right side, you're seeing invoice-only tools. On the bottom, the Sage, Tabs, and PC Law are 3 older programs, and they have the look and feel and act like older programs. LienLaw and eBility really go head-to-head, both with QuickBooks apps in the QuickBooks marketplace, and Bill for Time kind of has a little bit, it crosses both practice management invoicing, but I steered it more towards the right. So when we have people come into our ecosystem, they're typically looking at LienLaw, of course, eBility, and Clio is the real sort of leader on the left side. All right, so I'm going to ask this to Linda. Why are attorneys great clients? You just wrote a blog post to this, so I'm going to have you start on this.
Yeah, I did actually. This, when you talk about having to niche your business, and I remember sitting there going, oh my gosh, who do I want to work with? Because I had a variety of clients. And I actually sat down and realized that getting the workflow in place is the perfect way to, you can kind of streamline my job. Working with attorneys was my answer because the people that I work with are just great to work with. They, one of the things I really love about them is if I ask them for paperwork, I get it back instantly. I don't have to beg, or sometimes I feel like nagging is the word that comes to mind when I have to ask for documents from, maybe at this point in the year, I'm still asking for things from January. I also like working with them because they're professional and they respect us as professionals. That's the other thing it's really, you have a very respectful relationship with them. They're no nonsense. They just take, you ask them a question, they give you the answer. It's not a lot of a lot of chatter, and I sometimes feel like I'm a therapist to some of my clients, but not with the attorneys. It's all business and we get it done. And I just really enjoy working with them as my customers. They're just great to work with.
Brandy, so you obviously started with attorneys and stuck with them. And was there ever a moment that you wavered, with this decision? Like, oh gosh, what did I do? I picked all these attorneys.
No. There has been, not in regards to the attorneys. I haven't wavered and been like, oh, I shouldn't have niched in attorneys. Definitely not. There's been a time or two where I've decided to take a client that wasn't an attorney because maybe they were a friend of a friend or something like that. And I've regretted that decision. It's much easier to just work with attorneys.
And how did that change as from your first working with attorneys to now 2.5 years later? Meaning, do you think, did you change, or did you have to learn how to work with them? Beyond the mechanics of how they do bookkeeping, I'm talking about the interpersonal relationships that you create.
Yeah, I've changed how I do things from going over to financial statements with them. At the very beginning, I tried to explain every single line to them, and that was just took way too much of their time, and they didn't, they obviously can look at it and go, okay, advertising is this and whatever. I don't need to explain everything to them. And then, and now most of my going over financial statements is where we see each other on our webcams, and they've already received their financial statements. They've looked over them. They come to me with the questions that they have on individual things. So it's more personal now, definitely with them.
So I put this slide up, and I wrote it because this is the way I sort of articulate when I talk about how we at LienLaw perceive how lawyers view the world financially. And I kind of want to just quickly go through these 4 points, which is first, my firm or my practice. The idea of, if you're a managing partner, you're looking at the firm. If you're an attorney, you're looking at your own bed of work. That's one critical component. 2 is the subordinates and timekeepers, and it's looking at their productivity. The idea that, am I writing down a lot of time? Are they billing at a certain rate? How much rate do I need them to bill at for me to make sure I can afford to pay that person? The third data point is their clients. The idea here is, Brandy asked me this question, what I meant by this, and when I was presenting it to her earlier, which is, what's a good client from a bad client? And what I mean by that is, attorneys will always take certain clients out of an affinity, or it's an interesting case and it's not financially driven, but that's tends to be a minority of their practice, and the majority is the nuts and bolts of revenue. So the question is, what are good clients? How do they get from where they are to where they need to go? How do they divorce themselves for bad clients financially, when I say bad clients, and how do they earn more new clients? And you can't help them necessarily earn new clients, but you can begin to kind of, help them understand what's a bad client. And then the last is compliance, and that's really related to trust accounting. And I guess, either of you, maybe Brandy, you could start, is how has your communication evolved so that you can speak to kind of these data points? Are you seeing attorneys asking questions around some of these? Do you feel like there's an opportunity to talk about some of these things?
For sure. For example, I had an attorney asking me if I thought it was a good idea to charge a consultant fee or not. And then so to respond to him, I was like, well, let's take a look at the data. If you're charging a consulting fee, how many of those people are turning into clients, and what do those clients pay, and so forth? How profitable are they? Versus, let's test it and do free consultations, and then how many of those turn into clients? And then a third test might be, it's a free consultation, sort of. If you decide to use them as your law practice, it's free, but if you decide not to, then you have to pay some sort of money. And so we've kind of started testing with that to get them the information so then they can go out and make the best financial decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Linda, any comments there?
Actually, I think too, it's, almost the word bookkeeper has kind of become passé. It's like you have that vision of what a bookkeeper is. And in today's world with all the automation, we've become more of a data analyst, right? And there's a lot of great apps and tools that can help us with that. And when you work with attorneys, they get it. The thing with working with attorneys, I've found in my experience has been they are very time sensitive. They're always in a rush. They're always going somewhere or have a shortness of time. So a lot of times I'll actually analyze the data and record it, send it to them so they can take a look at it. And then we can schedule a time to go over it where now they have at their leisure, they can do it in the evening, look at what I've kind of gone through the books and explained, and maybe say, I just had this happen with an attorney recently where he's doing really well. He's just started out and he's doing really well. It's been in practice for a couple of years, and he's been taking draws. He's a partnership, but he acts like an S corp, and he's got the ability to start to maybe do a payroll and maybe start paying some payroll taxes. And I had him have that discussion with his accountant, the CPA of record, and talked about maybe starting just getting his own retirement plan going and put some money away for himself because he's a younger guy, and there's just some things he can do in his business that can actually be beneficial for him to reduce the profit a little bit, put some money in his pocket as far as towards his own retirement and things like that. You analyze the data for them. You take a look at where they're at, and maybe even help them. If you start working with a lot of them, you can define maybe you work with one where you say, hey, they're doing the same thing here, but it's less expensive. Maybe I'll let this attorney know that there's maybe a different app that he could be using, or a different service he could be getting.
Yeah,
it helps by working with that many people.
I think that plays into the idea that you're moving away. This is the theme, right? Moving away from being the commoditized after the fact bookkeeper to being someone who can help them understand their business financially, because most small law firms don't have any internal financial smarts, meaning they don't have analysts, they don't have a controller or a CFO. So they're sort of stumbling around. And I'll tell you, most attorneys really they have this sort of gut cash flow barometer as to their success, and they sort of know how many hours they've done, and they know their overhead, and they sort of run it like that. And it's amazing because some of these people are very sophisticated in what they offer, but very rudimentary in their financials. So just to kind of move off of that, is that this is sort of the summary page of the key takeaways that, and I think the most important is that they're upmarket and sophisticated people. I think that's what I'm hearing, and that the idea is that you can rise up and be upmarket and offer more value. So what makes
Jonathan,
law firms... Yeah. Uh-oh, lost a microphone.
Sorry, I lost you, but Jonathan, I was going to say we should do another poll.
Oh, yes, good. That was a really good interruption.
Good call, Brandy.
As I drop my
All
phone and connect my headset.
Okay, we'll launch it, and then we're going to jump in. I just opened the poll, and then we're going to jump into a little bit of a LienLaw demo. So we're talking, the poll is, how established is your practice? And the poll's open. Almost half of you voted, a little more now. Okay. I'm going to close it. 30% of you are brand new, and 70% are established, but you're looking to grow. So I'm going to jump out of this and actually show, because we're going to start talking a little bit about workflows. And I wanted to just introduce LienLaw, the product. So bear with me, I'm on my personal computer and I'm juggling between running the demo and this. But so I'm in a browser and I want to just think about LienLaw from you, the accounting community. I'm not necessarily thinking about you, the lawyer. And I'm in a browser and you can see moving left to right the main navigational points of LienLaw, and we have plenty of different ways to enter time. So time tracking is really diverse and easy for the users, but I wanted to speak to one workflow that really kind of shows off the integration of LienLaw with QuickBooks Online. And you can see I've got QuickBooks, I should be signed in here. It timed out. So I'm going to go in and just talk about expenses real quick in this little workflow. These are reimbursable expenses. And the reason I bring it up, it's one of the places where lawyers leave a lot of money on the table. And not because they write it off saying, well, I'm doing okay. But the truth is they're not tracking their reimbursable expenses well enough such that they leave 7% on the table because they're not being reimbursed for expenses. So when we look at the LienLaw expenses, the ones that do not have the white dots, essentially the green dots next to them, those were entered in LienLaw. So to add an expense, I can just come in and say, let's go to the depot and pick a specific matter, and I can and I'm working here where expenses entered into LienLaw are deemed soft costs. So maybe there were some copying charges and it was $25. Now, I can also, and again, think about you working in QuickBooks, you have a bank feed coming in or a credit card feed or a bill. I can come into QuickBooks and just say expense, and I'll just add an expense example. I'm going to hide that. And what LienLaw is doing here is we're monitoring this line item, prepaid current expenses, and I'll just say this is a legal expense, and it was $72, and I'm going to pick my client, the depot. Now, even if we don't know the client, in this instance, I have two different matters for the client, and I save and close. LienLaw is going to immediately pick that up. So if I just refresh my page, you'll see that if I come down to the bottom, here's the legal expense, the $72, the depot lease agreement. It's right there. So I entered one, copying charges, the $25 in LienLaw, but I entered the second one directly in QuickBooks. And those are ready to be put on a draft invoice and passed back to QuickBooks. So that's something unique to LienLaw. And I just want you to think about the workflow of expenses where you can be working in the application that is native and comfortable to you in your processes like QuickBooks Online, and your lawyers or someone else can be working in LienLaw. Now, to talk about, we were just talking about that idea that we can add value around these different lenses of how's my firm doing, how's my client doing. There's a report here that I also wanted to show called Ready to Bill. And this is an example where LienLaw is pulling out real-time data from QuickBooks. So on the left side, you're seeing the WIP. This is the work in progress for a given month. And I might want to look at the depot. So on the right-hand side, I'm looking at real-time QuickBooks data. Here's the receivable balance, the last payment, the payment date, and the trust balance. And so you might come down and help that lawyer understand where they're trending for the month. Now I'm looking at all time, but if I looked at a particular month, and you can look at where where their work in progress is and give them an update. Hey, you're trending in the right direction, the wrong direction. You might look at specific things like trust to WIP balance. So we can look at this depot client and know that they've got $1,700 in work in progress right now, but they only have $1,600 in trust. That's a great flag to wave for your attorney. So the idea is that you have live access to it, the attorney has live access to data. And when I look at this 1655, that's actually being pulled directly from the chart of accounts where LienLaw keeps its trust account. So that's the 1655. That's where that number is being originated from. And every time LienLaw displays it, it's there. So I'm going to come back to LienLaw in a minute and show an invoice with the depot. But the idea is that LienLaw is here to track the time, add the expenses, produce the invoices, and help you manage that trust account. So let's go back, and I don't want to get too deep into it, and say, what do lawyers expect? So, Brandy, why don't you start with that question? I put some different four things, but to sort of characterize when you walk into an attorney and you start to meet them, what are they expecting from you?
Well, part of what they're expecting is that you know what a trust account is, or an IOLTA account. Some of them call them trust, some call them IOLTA, and sort of how that works. Interest is paid into it, and it's automatically transferred to the state, and also what kind of law they practice. That then determines if they're getting settlement checks, if they're doing stuff on retainers. They want you to kind of already have a feel for how their law practice works and the things that are going to become important to them as it relates to their trust account.
And Linda, what your thoughts on that? Like, what have you had have you ever been surprised at questions that maybe a lawyer asked you in the first few meetings, or thrown?
I think a lot of times, honestly, I had a lot of clients that come to me that they've already had a bad experience with a bookkeeper, and I end up having to dive through a mess and fix the mess. So I get to know the client on that level by just going through the file and working with them. And there's a lot of hand-holding and a lot of when you work one-on-one through detangling something, you do spend a lot of time, and there's a lot of communication back and forth. And I think that that's key when you work with the client, especially in the beginning. I do a lot of hand-holding, a lot of phone calls, a lot of communication back and forth, just to make sure everything's exactly how it is. And we'll do Zoom meetings to make sure that everything's the way they want it in the end. But I would have to say, when working with them, their time is important to them, right? So you need to keep the conversation on hand of exactly what the task is that you're working with them, and make sure that they understand where you're coming from, and they love the reports. They love to be able to that you can able to address it with them really quickly and get the information to them in an orderly fashion, so that they're understanding that it's being done on time. So they're very time sensitive in their job, and they expect the work done, and that they're not looking and saying, how come my books aren't reconciled and it's the end of the month? They want their books and everything in order in a real timely fashion.
The thing that I learned early on in working with attorneys was that they have a mindset, and I'm generalizing, of course, but they're critical thinkers, and they're meant to question. And sometimes that can be interpreted as if you're doing something wrong, but it's not that intent. The idea is that they go in and examine and look for things that are wrong. That's what they do. And they look for, and they can be. I was once with this attorney, and he was thinking about LienLaw, and I'm selling him, and I get on with him, and he's the senior partner, and I literally felt like I was being deposed. Literally the way that his brain worked, he was sort of methodically going through this sequence of a thought process. And he actually said, "Didn't you say 2 questions ago it was this?" And I was like, "Whoa, wait a second." I may have, I'm not sure. But the point is once I understood that mindset, I just accepted it and gave them the information they wanted, and it was done. And I had someone else speak to that they sort of thought they had a bad attorney experience, thinking the attorney was being disrespectful, but really they were just asking the questions they needed to ask. So I put up the slide here: workflows drive success. I said this spontaneously at QuickBooks Connect, and I want to bring it up to the group and talk about the importance of a workflow. And what I mean by workflow is a series of things that you do in tasks, right? You start with time entry and add expenses, produce an invoice, deliver it over to QuickBooks, and it goes out to the client and you pay the invoice. That's a workflow. And and I kind of want to talk a little bit about how workflows drive good data. And if you have good data, you can get insights. And with insights, you can achieve efficiency and profitability. And I guess, what have been your experiences? Linda, maybe you go on this one about how you have to install that workflow and what some of the, how do you pitch that? How do you make sure the client understands that and adheres to it?
It's funny because of doing the niche, I have a specific workflow and specific apps that I use. So I use Active Collab for my practice management, from my side of the firm. How I work with the client, I try to have them invite them in so that they can see as things are going. Most of them don't want to be involved in that, but I offer it to them. I want transparency with them. I use Slack, a Slack channel. And I set that up so that we communicate that way. I find it's real easy, and I think they like to communicate through Slack because I'll put the channels in, and then they can, if I have a question about reconciliation or a question about a transaction, I can put the message in there, and then they answer it in there, and they know that that's what my question's about. And it's real simple and fast for them to work that way. And I use other apps too. I use Loom for videoing things to, if I have something that needs to be addressed, if they have to reconnect a bank feed or something like that, I have a channel for that. So I have different channels, and channels for accounts receivable if there's an issue or we need to address maybe a client that's not paying them, or they're, if it's a firm that has to bill out and they haven't been receiving the payment, how do we want to take the steps to go forward? And you set those work processes in place so that there's a good line of communication, so they understand where we're at, we understand where they're at, and then they don't have to deal with that, because that's our job, to make sure that they don't have to deal with the accounting side of it, that they can just do what they do best. We do what we do best.
And do you find that, Brandy, I'm gonna ask you a question in just a sec, but do you find that like there's some tension in the beginning about, hey, you need HubDoc, or you need, this other tool, or this is the way, now you need to work in Slack and you didn't work before. How do you deal with the adoption of your, workflows or your way of doing things?
I think for me, a lot of the apps like HubDoc, I use that it's for my benefit more than theirs, as far as it's now I don't have to bother them for the statements. So I've had at times where maybe the attorney will be saying, I don't want to be part of, I don't want to be part of HubDoc. I'll just email you the statements. And then once I set up a boomerang message, and every month I'm like, okay, I need the statements. Once they realize that that's kind of a pain, that they have to take the time to send me the statement, then they're like, well, how about that HubDoc thing again? What do I do? I just sign up for it, and it's going to grab that for you. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. And the same with Slack. Sometimes they're resistant. I'm finding more nowadays, though, people know Slack, and they think it's fabulous that I use Slack as a tool, and that they can just get a Slack message, and nobody likes email anymore.
Yeah,
I can honestly tell you, sometimes it gets lost. So Slack organizes the requests or the questions. So I just love Slack. It's one of my favorite parts of my tools that I use.
We should Slack. I have Slack too.
Yeah.
Brandy, you work a little differently because you're more, I think, adopting of what's happening in the law firm, at least from the times that we've talked. So maybe speak to how you approach a firm, and really the idea is that if we get the workflows, you talked about how if the workflows work, we get out of the functional value of bookkeeping into more the consultative value of the insights that you can bring. But Brandy, you speak to how you approach a client and how workflows kind of play out.
Yeah, so I know that there's plenty of bookkeepers that are like, here's my apps, and you have to use all of these. But I really try to be flexible and use whatever tools that they have, as long as they integrate well with QuickBooks Online. And that's my one tool I won't give up. But with the flexibility, there does come a little bit more time that's spent doing tasks. It can't be as streamlined. Whereas if you're using the same apps for every customer, then obviously that would be more efficient. But then as far as like getting the workflows and getting the good data, I know that when you first start off with an attorney client, oftentimes their trust account is off, and they don't know how much each person has in their trust account. And so you have to set up procedures for going forward with them on, here's how we communicate, here's how we get the information from you, and what I need, so that going forward it's correct. And then let's do a forensic accounting and try to go backwards and see what we can figure out on that end. And then once you have that data, then you can tell, oh, look, I actually had $30,000 sitting there in my trust account that was earned income that I need to now move over and to my operating account, and things like that.
Yeah, I put a slide up, and I'm going to jump into LienLaw and show a workflow real quick related to trust accounting, because someone on the crowd asked for some more details there. But the idea here is these steps that we outline. The chart accounts is sort of the source of truth, right? We need to understand that those are set up right, and then you kind of have to learn and what they're doing today to try to back out where the efficiencies and inefficiencies are. And I think step 3 is the most critical. And I'm speaking of this from experience of onboarding people on the LienLaw. And this is many folks that are doing QuickBooks on their own and struggle, which is looking at all the many workflows. How do you handle an expense? How are we dealing with the trust payments? How are we producing an invoice? How are we making payments to invoices? All those many things. Helping the firm understand, normalize, and institutionalize those goes such a long ways to getting out of the minutia of we can't even get the data in right and up into insights, and that's really where you're trying to go. So I'm going to jump out and just show, because we're talking about workflows real quick, and show LienLaw again. So we're talking about this depot client, and just so we understand the way LienLaw works, so when we set up our chart of accounts, LienLaw is working from a trust accounting side where we have the asset account, and this side we have 2. So I'm showing you 2 different IOLTA bank accounts. One's called escrow, one's called IOLTA. And then on the liability side, we establish the liability, and I can do it both in client matter-based, so Finkel has 2 matters, or client-based. And in each ledger is the in and out of money, and LienLaw is making sure that we're saying who the source is, what it was for, and payments, what those are for. So LienLaw is tracking all of this trust in QuickBooks, but really what it looks like to the end user, meaning that attorney or their delegates, is this trust accounting page. So in here you see those 2 same bank accounts and then the liability associated, and then each client has their ledger. So when we actually set up a trust account, LienLaw, by saying a trust deposit, LienLaw will create that ledger in the trust account for you. And in this instance, I can see that 1655 balance that I cited earlier. And when I look at those transactions and load them in LienLaw, these are the same transactions. So here's those. So the client is seeing all of this in real time. So talking about workflows and regimenting workflows, LienLaw is knew that and tried to create some functionality that the lawyer or the law firm can trigger trust activities, but all of the data ends up. And if I just go into our billing and show you one of the most important pieces, I'm just going to go to that depot client and produce an invoice. And I'm just going to take this off that expense because we don't want to show that expense right now. And when I produce that draft invoice, and I just type in depot here, LienLaw is actually going to stamp out that trust statement. So, we had 1655 in trust, 1590 in this invoice total. So it's helping you, the accountant, the law firm, communicate back to the client. When I approve and submit it, that'll bring it over to QuickBooks. And I can actually go into LienLaw and finish that transaction, because now we see a receivable balance. So if I just come over here to sales, all sales, that depot client is somewhere in here. Let me just do it by clients. It'll be a little easier. So I'm just going to make a quick payment on that because the receivable balance is in QuickBooks now. And by saying record payment, LienLaw is actually facilitating that transaction such that we're writing a check out of operating, deposited into, I'm writing a check out of trust, depositing in operating, making a payment. And I'm not trying to get too in the weeds, but I just want to communicate that there's a workflow here so that at the end result, the client can quickly produce an invoice like this that actually shows a paid invoice. So it's been paid, balance forward, and then there's that trust statement we did. So again, I don't want to get too in the weeds of LienLaw, but the idea is that, oops, I got to get to the right slide. The idea is that establishing those many workflows are really super critical because it helps normalize it. All right, let's move forward. And I just kind of talked about trust, and you're all going to get this deck about trust accounting, and it does have some very helpful links at the bottom explaining trust accounting. So let's talk about services. Brandy, how did you, when you came up with your company, begin to normalize and productize your services? How did you sort of set it up and get to a place where you can communicate that to your clients?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what you mean by that, but I guess I set up packages for them, and knowing that every single attorney is going to have at least 2 bank accounts plus credit card transactions, and usually, and so then here's just sort of normal bookkeeping services, including reconciliation, trust reconciliation for them. And then also then adding on compliancy, if they need help with record keeping like the front and back copies of every check for the last 7 years and so forth, that kind of thing. I'm not sure if that's what you were asking about or if it was something else.
Well, no, I was just trying to say that you come out of the gate and you know that you can do bookkeeping, and then there's these other things, and I'm just was curious how you started and then how it normalized into packages that you actually knew you could sell, and what those would what those would cost. Meaning, how did you get to the point where you could actually say it's going to be X dollars a month and actually knew that you could make money on the deal?
Well, obviously, well, not obviously, but at the beginning, I didn't really know. And so I guess it was mostly through trial and error and finding out when I was talking to potential clients, they would ask me things like, well, do you provide payroll, or do you provide, invoicing, or this and so forth. So it was like, okay, here's the things that are really important to them to add to it. And then when I got my first client, I way underpriced it and had no idea what I was doing. And then as I got more clients, I realized, okay, well, based on the size of the practice, whether it's one attorney, two attorneys, and looking at their transactions, I can easily tell just in a couple of minutes of looking at their QuickBooks Online account how much I need to charge in order to make money on it.
And Linda, did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, well, I've been doing this actually. Next year, I'm going to be celebrating my 20th year of having my own business and doing bookkeeping for people. And for me, it's evolved. It's still evolving. And I was just looking at my webpage the other day because what I was doing a few years ago is not the same as what I'm doing now. So a lot of times I have the cleanup file. I give a fixed price when I have to clean up a file. And then when I do ongoing bookkeeping, there's several levels. It basically starts with just write-up work where I just do downloading and the reconciling the basic stuff. I reconcile all the trust accounts. That higher level, because you're working with attorneys, is a little bit different, but you get a little bit more money for that. And then when you move on to, if I have to do the invoicing, then that's another add-on and maybe more money. Payroll, I outsource that to usually to QuickBooks Payroll. I do full service. I just let them do that because I can't do it for the price that they do it for. So
I just put up on screen, this is actually Brandi's webpage, and you can see that she's productized it really pretty clearly for the end user. So the one comment I want to make here from my side, what we've seen, and again, we talked to a lot of lawyers, is this idea that, of course, you have the general bookkeeping and that's sort of the commoditized, here it is. Opportunities for additional income, whether it's packaged together or whether it's sort of an add-on, is this idea of outsourced invoicing. So if you have a LienLaw QuickBooks Online environment, it's very easy to produce the draft invoices, work with the attorney on reviewing them, and then actually deliver them out via QuickBooks and help them with AR. That becomes a component that you can charge more for. The trust reconciliation should always be an additional charge because it's very detailed and has a very manual nature to it, but it's critical. You almost don't even want to work with a law firm that's not willing to do a monthly reconciliation, because I think it's characteristics of bad behavior across all their books. And unless they're willing to change and adopt, it's almost, I think it's a trigger to me that says that's a bad client. And I wouldn't want to work with them because I just would suspect there'd be problems downstream with other data. And the last is, we talked about bigger firms. When I start talking about multiple partners, compensation reporting becomes a real opportunity, I'll present it, because it's, you're looking at the way attorneys tend to get compensated is, not just what was billable, what actually got billed and what was collected. And then there's subcomponents of who originated the money. So there's this idea of an originating attorney might get a percentage of it. You might have an attorney and associate where the attorney gets 10% of all of the associate's billings. And then to add more complexity to it, then you get into other compensation or other partnership agreements between multiple partners. So there's another compensation reporting is another opportunity to think about how you can add on different products into that attorney. Okay, so let's talk about the value you add. When you pitch this, Linda, like, what's your value? I mean, like, if it comes down to one, nugget, how would you, the attorney saying, what do you do for them? What is the most important thing that you perceive that you do for law firms?
I would say for me, it's getting the data and getting good data in so that I can give them good reports, give them a good idea of where they're at in their business. I mean, it's a lot of what we do nowadays is not what I did 20 years ago, where I would manually type everything in. Now there's automation to it, so there's a lot of value to the fact that the data is being pushed in really quickly. One of the things I love about LienLaw, and one of the selling features, if I have an attorney come to me who has not had or is just starting out and doesn't have their product in place, is that invoicing. Because the invoicing, if you try to do it straight up on QuickBooks Online, it's a pretty ugly invoicing process. It doesn't work for attorneys. And the ability to go with LienLaw, they have no problem learning the app. If you have to take them through the steps, which I know you do, Jonathan, it's fairly easy. It's intuitive product. So for me, it's truly making sure that they're compliant in their books. They have to be. It's required by law. They could lose their license if they're not with their trust accounting. And like you said before, working with attorneys, I've not had an issue where somebody's not. They want to have their records exact, and we set up processes in place where especially if they're doing some of it and they're doing the LienLaw side and I'm doing the accounting side. So you have to have some of that in place so that we work together as a team, because that's basically what you are as your accountant. As the accountant in the product, you're a team with your client, and my client is the attorney. So I want to make sure that I can make their life easier.
Brandy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the making their life easier aspect of it. That's what I really try to do. Is like to the attorney, you focus on your time entering it into LienLaw and so forth, and I do all the stuff that's in QuickBooks Online, and and then there only pretty much need to be in that one app. I can do all the rest of it and save them tons of time, make it super easy for them. And then also, especially with LienLaw, where it talks back and forth to QuickBooks Online, all the reports are going to be real time and updated for them so they can make accurate financial decisions.
Yeah, I brought this slide back. We had presented earlier, and I think it really comes down to, I mean, there's workflows and all those other sort of nuances, but it comes back to helping the lawyer look at their practice, look at the subordinates, understand their clients, and be compliant. I mean, I think that's the real insights and value add. And I think all of those other working pieces about workflows and feed into this is, how do you become that partner? How do you move out of the functional sort of commoditized, we're just doing books and handing you an income statement, to being that partnership that you just described, hey, we need to think about, retirement, or hey, this client is a bad client. I mean, and it's, it doesn't take a lot of work to begin to understand and see those patterns, but if you have good data. So how do you get started? I want to take a step, Brandy, backwards and ask, how did you pick law? Like, how did you get started? You at some point made a decision. I mean, Linda, you've been doing it for 20 years and you had many non-law clients and the sort of niching in, but like Brandy, you like got started. You said, I'm going to start a bookkeeping firm and it's going to be only legal. So how did that come to be?
Yeah, well, when I started my own virtual practice, I read everything online that I could and about starting the bookkeeping business, and everywhere I read said you should have a niche. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, like, who do I know, and what I happen to know a lot of my friends are attorneys, and they happen to tell me a lot about their bookkeeping problems. We go out to happy hour or whatever, and they're telling me a problem. I'm like, I know I can solve that problem for you. And then there's lots of reasons why I chose to niche in attorneys, but a more personal reason is that my husband was in a motorcycle accident years ago, and he's perfectly fine, but we had hired an attorney to help us get back money to pay for his medical bills. And that's the first time I've ever even talked to an attorney, really needing them for myself. And I just really realized how helpful they are, and that they really want to make a difference in the world, and they are helping people through the worst times in their lives, whether it's a divorce or a custody case or a personal injury or whatever. And it's just, they're really, in my mind, truly amazing people to work with.
Yeah. And so I wanted to add a few little things here, which is I think it's important to pick your niche, and I don't mean law. I mean, the size of firm that you really want to attract, maybe the practice areas. Brandy, you said it. I want to be virtual only. That's a statement. I'm only going to work with clients that are willing to be online only. That speaks to the firm, their technical dexterity, their ideas. So I think that don't dismiss the importance of really looking and saying, who is that target attorney? What type of practice areas are they doing? Meaning, you might have, as Brandy said, a contingency attorney, which means that they're doing everything on spec. So cash flow is really tough for them, but they get these big payments. So it's sort of this feast of money, and then they're just completely out of it. There might be litigators that have very long cases that tax can be really complicated. So it's important not just say law, but to even niche down in types of law. And there's, again, on the slide deck has some types of law practices. How important was it, Linda, for you? Like, I remember when you came into LienLaw, like you didn't know how to use LienLaw, and I think it was one of the first legal clients you had. Maybe it wasn't, but how important was it for you to like learn the workflows, or could you just kind of learn on as you go?
Well, I have to say, I did work in a law firm a long time ago as a bookkeeper, so I had a little bit of background there, which helped. But when I did, you're right. When I started working, was an attorney who reached out to me in my general area. It was one of my few clients that I have right local to me. And Brandy said her business is 2 years old, I think, and that's when I went to QuickBooks Connect to that 2016, and it was all about niching your business. And I remember hearing about how if you niche your business, it's going to set you apart from your competition, and it makes you be an expert in your field. So you start to study, you start to learn all the nuances, and then as you start to develop your practice and pick up more clients, you're just going to be able to be the expert in that field. So now when someone comes to me now that I've really shifted my practice to in that direction, if there's a landscaping company that comes to me, I now have a bookkeeper that I'll say, hey, I don't do that anymore, but here's the name of somebody who does do that. So she's exclusive to that. And I think that piece of it, and I can build my workflows, and it just helps you to fine tune your job and make it better. I think for me is better. I give a better service that way.
I wanted the second slide of getting started. I said, what is it you're selling and what does it cost, and your pro advisor page. So I think it's important. I want to show, and this might not even be pertinent, but there's this woman, Stephanie, and I don't know who she is. I'm sure she's a really competent, fantastic person. But when I first looked at her pro advisor page, I just did a search around Texas, and she doesn't today, but she had legal as one of her line items, meaning she offered legal as a line item. And then I went to her website. And if you think about all of these disciplines that she has, computer software, design, architecture, nonprofit, and then you go to her website, and it's like, well, it says a lot about what she does, but it doesn't say anything to the end user as to who it is they're trying to talk to. It's so generic, and it's all about their process and work with me, but it doesn't say that they know anything about you. And then when you look at Brandy's, just to showcase Brandy's, I mean, she's like all about legal. All she says is, I serve legal, one industry, and a little narrative there. And when you come into Brandy's site, it's like the first thing it says is bookkeeping services for lawyers. This is super meaningful to attorneys. And Brandy, you had the luxury of like kicking it out from the get-go of saying you're only lawyer. But Linda, tell me about your process. I mean, you just said you went to your website, and is that scary for you at all? I mean, like to say I'm just going to do law. I mean, Brandy, was it scary for you? I mean, either of you kind of speak to that.
For me, it was scary because I have clients, I have a client base that there's different businesses that I've worked with, all these different kinds of businesses, but I don't have to specifically just do attorneys. Like I said, I do real estate as well, and then I do startups, but I love working with attorneys the best. I find that to be the niche that I enjoy working with. And yes, I've addressed, but you know what? Your website is something you should probably look at, like you look at your will. every year or every 2 years, because I looked at mine. It's like, it's been a couple of years since I've done anything to it. And I've actually, if you go on my website, you'll see that I've changed my front page anyway. I'm still working on it. It's a work in process. Yeah, you can see that I definitely work with attorneys now, and my three main specialized clients, what I want to work with, basically.
So I want to just quickly end this by saying, what's next? How do you get going? And some of you already said you're working with attorneys, and so there's continuing education. Some of you are wanting to niche in. We have something called the LienLaw Accounting Pro program. Both, Brandy and Linda are part of our pros. There's lots of support there. There's some training there. There's community. There's referrals. There's an opportunity to connect and be part of a group of people that are trying to understand how to best service these law folks. And some of the things we talk about are LienLaw, but a lot of it is just really talking about how to work with attorneys. There's some communities too. There's Amanda's group, Law Firm and Accounting and Bookkeepers, which is a Facebook community that's very active, and it's across a spectrum of different apps they talk about and processes. There's some training specific. Brandy has some QuickBooks online courses that are specific to lawyers, and then Amanda also has this elephant training. So there's some online training to help you get niched in. But I think number 4, and Brandy, I'm just curious, did you ever do this? And we've got to end this soon, but in part of your starting your business 2.5 years ago, did you take meetings with attorneys before and just like in an informational way?
Oh yes, for sure. I set a goal for myself to do 5 attorneys before I ever even opened my business. And so I met with people and I just asked them questions. What are your, what problems do you have as it relates to your finances, and how does this work, and how do you do this? And, just tons of questions for them. And like I said, luckily I have a lot of friends who are attorneys, so I was able to harass most of them, or they got me their, whoever they were working for, I could speak to their owner or the head attorney, partner attorney, and ask them questions.
And they all took the time to speak to you, right?
Yeah, I didn't have a single person tell me no.
And I want to make that point. That's how generous attorneys are. They really are. They will respect the fact that you're trying to understand something, and they'll take the time to meet with you. And that goes into the characteristics of who they are. And I think that's the most critical first step, is just starting to talk to attorneys. So I'm going to skip this. It'll be in the decks what questions to ask, because we're going to run out of time. But we're not going to get to any questions, but if there's something specific or you want a demo, in the LienLaw Accounting Pro, we're going to have a meetup in the next week or so, which is just a casual get together that we'll throw out. I think the first topic is going to be the best apps, meaning apps in the QuickBooks marketplace for law firms. So there's lots of ways to engage with us. If you have a specific question, you can reach out to me directly through our website. I'll get it. And I want to thank everyone for your community, your interest in LienLaw, and the time you took today. Brandy, thank you so much. And Linda, thank you so much for your support, your evangelism of LienLaw, and all that you do for us. We're really, truly appreciative here, and also, of course, for participating on this webinar. Everyone have a really lovely holiday. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.